Hi, I'm Trankoalaty. Welcome back. Today we're talking about Animorphs number 10, The Android, released August 1997, coming in at 170 pages. The cover shows Marco morphing into a tarantula. The inner image is that tarantula next to a pair of legs, seemingly of androidian nature. Here's the animation in the corner while I describe what I recall from this book. Maybe. I don't remember much from the book, but I do recall a few things now that it's come up. I recall that there's an android named David, and I think that's just because of that movie with the teddy bear AI. That one might be tainting my memory a bit. Anyways, I recall the character, though I don't know how he was discovered, being an android, an alien android that's been here for many, many, many years. The inner cover showed the bone structure that I didn't recall, but I did remember something about it vaguely standing on like two dog-shaped legs. The android projects an image to the outside world so it can create holograms. I remember it somehow studying Yeerks and trying to stay hidden despite having a captured Yeerk inside of it. Something to that effect. The other thing is I don't recall the androids coming back in the other books, but I also don't remember them being killed either. I'm interested to see how far off I was with all this recollecting. All of that out of the way, let's find out what actually happens in The Android. The book starts with Marco introducing himself. He's funny and charming. He just knows everyone thinks he's cute, especially just because he got his hair cut. Okay, so my first question comes up, and I'm relating it to Wolverine X-Men, but like, how does morphing work with the hair? Would it be whatever you want, or whatever you envision when you morph? And I bring up Wolverine because he regenerates fast, right? So like, does his hair just grow instantly, constantly until it's terminal length, but it stays the same length? I don't know. I just don't like what happens there. But with the Animorphs, they're transforming themselves. So how do they know when they're like done morphing or not? Especially because hair isn't even living tissue, right? Got a bit tangled up there. Marco introduces the Yeerk threat. Marco explains the Yeerks are slugs. His mother is a controller and has been for an unknown length of time, but he thought she was dead after her disappearance. But lo, it was actually a ruse. He says only Jake knows it's his mom, and he doesn't want the others to know that his mom is Visser 1 so that they don't pity him. But like, do they pity Jake? Because his brother is a controller. I know it's not your mom, but like, same, family controller, right? Like, he does say it was a powerful Yeerk, Visser 1, who his mother hosts, which makes me wonder how the Yeerks gain power. One Yeerk is as much of a slug as another, right? The Visser just has to trust that his guards won't overthrow him when he's like re-upping in the Kandrona pod pools. Like, yeah, why wouldn't his guards overthrow him when he's just in his slug form when he needs Kandrona? And how come the Andalite for Visser 3 doesn't try to morph when he's uncontrolled? Okay, they explained that one with like, oh, he just doesn't remember, but like, he doesn't remember how to think of any animal and just morph into that? Sounds like he's not trying hard enough. I guess it's been a while. Worst case, the guards shoot him and he dies instead of being controlled. And that's good, right? Marco is talking with Jake as they walk home. He is trying to convince Jake that they could morph into dogs and get into an outdoor concert, get into and listen to a concert, and enjoy the show for free, because they didn't make a rule against dogs listening to music. Jake is trying to be responsible and say they shouldn't use their powers that way, especially after he admonished Cassie and Rachel for using their morphs for personal gains. And Marco says the concert will have Atlantis, Offspring, and 9 Inch Nails. And I've seen 2 of the 3 of those live. They're very good. It's also impressive that the book managed to pick artists that are still relevant, like almost 30 years later. Marco's last-ditch effort was to say that Atlantis might be a controller, and it's their duty to investigate. They were nearing Jake's house and had to halt the conversation because Tom is a controller. Jake concedes and tells Marco that if he caught wind that Marco was going, well, then Jake would just have to go to watch his back. Wink, wink. And Jake will go as his doggo, and Marco has already gotten a morph for a dog, an Irish setter, because that's what the chicks dig. That's what he says. The chapter ends with vague foreshadowing. Marco just says, I thought it would be a normal day and the concert, but boy, was I wrong. And that foreshadows things going awry, but not in the way that, like, the things go awry at the concert. They still do manage to sneak in and listen to music. The next chapter, they're trying to find a private place to morph for this outdoor concert with an eclectic lineup. I mean, Atlantis and Offspring? I don't know. I guess they didn't realize that there would be so many people at these concerts. But also morphing, the time limit is a concern because like 2 hours, you're going to miss half the show. They find a dumpster in the back alley, morph behind that. And Marco's never morphed into a dog before and thought it would be fine. But the dog has instincts just like the dolphins. It's just goofy and happy. Jake didn't want him to get too happy before they morphed, but Marco wasn't paying attention. Jake and Marco finish morphing. Marco just gives in to the dog's instincts and just starts running around like a crazy dog. He almost gets hit by a car and then stopped by some strangers for some scritches. He described the dog a lot like the dolphin, joy, lots of happiness, except the dogs like scent and all the information that they can perceive on it. And so Jake catches up with him, and when the scritcher is done, Marco's like, okay, we should get going. And so while they're enjoying the music of the Offspring, they notice a person handing out flyers for the sharing. They recognize him as a kid from their school who transferred away named Eric, with 2 E's, exactly where you expect. Jake and Marco notice something off about Eric, though, back in the present now, recapping this entire scenario to the others. Eric doesn't have a scent. Marco takes the chance to introduce everyone, as usual. When he gets to Tobias, I had another thought because he mentioned school and stuff. So Tobias is stuck as a bird, right? So he's halted at whatever level of education he has. That's fine. Plenty of people get by with less. But now he has a bird lifespan, a hawk lifespan. I don't know if that's more than a human, but many things are not. So what if at the end of their lives, they morph into either a younger human to live out the rest of their lives as, 2, morph into a young animal, like a really young tortoise or other animal that lives for a very long time, and then live out the rest of their lives as that. They effectively get like a ton of lifespan this way, right? Just spitballing how you could maximize how long you get to live. They all posit that Eric is connected to the Yeerks, what with the no smell and the flyers for the sharing. They throw out ideas about how to find him. They're like, we could look around school, we could check the internet, we could go back to the concert. But Cassie is just like, why don't we just use the phone book? They find a few names in the phone book for that part of town and take turns reconnaissancing them. At least Rachel is skeptical of why it's weird that Eric has no scent, but most of them are just convinced by that and the sharing flyers already. Marco and Jake are at a lunch table. Marco's writing English paper. The conversation started with paper talk and was pretty good dialogue. I felt like it felt normal, especially compared to some of the stuff that is antiquated. Why use simple word when conspicuous use of an outdated term is available? The conversation followed that Marco and Cassie found Eric's house the night before, and they want to get inside and figure it out, but Jake wants Tobias to tail him for a little bit in the daytime so that they're not completely lacking intel. Marco volunteers to help Tobias as well. Jake moved tables, sat by Cassie, and Marco notes that they try to keep an appearance up that they don't really know each other or have like connections to each other to avoid drawing suspicion to the Animorphs. Marco sees VP Chapman come into the cafeteria and starts talking about the Yeerks and the sharing. And VP Chapman is a leader in a high-ranking Yeerk. Eric is somehow tied up in it, but he's more of an acquaintance than a friend. Eric went to Marco's mom's funeral, which we don't know her name. All we know her as is Marco's mom and Visser 1. What's her name? Marco talks about how the sharing works. They're like a big community of organized activities for kids and adults and such, hiking, camping, business deals, ski resorts. So mostly it's legit, but they find the vulnerable people and groom them into being collaborators. Collaborators are controllers by will, by choice. I had always assumed that like all of the sharing was controllers, but I guess I'm wrong. Guess I just imagined it, just like I imagine everything that I read. Marco morphed into a bird after school, flew to Eric's house. Tobias is already there, and Marco's like, hello. And Tobias is like, hey, I've been watching you for like 20 minutes. And Marco's all, wow, you're so good. Tobias tells Marco to dodge at his count so that he doesn't get hit by a dive-bombing falcon. Marco spends a lot of the page actually describing flying and birds' eyes. Marco is shaken up by the dive bombing just missing, and Tobias is like, shake it off. You'll be fine. Just look up because that's usually where the danger is. Ooh, space. Here's Eric walking home. They see Eric being targeted by some bullies. The bullies start chasing Eric, and it's a busy street, and Eric trips and hits his head and gets run over by a bus. Hits his head on the bus side and gets run over at the same time. Tobias and Marco noticed that when he hit his head, he like disappeared, and whatever was there wasn't human. It was like metally and plasticky. No idea why the bullies take off. Maybe they didn't want to be like implicated if a kid just got run over by a bus and died. I don't know. Marco went home to check on his dad and to call Jake. And Tobias went on to go find Axe and see if he could make sense of what they saw. Marco calls Jake and he gets Tom instead at first. And Tom is like, yeah, come on to the sharing. It's real fun and stuff. You could bring your dad, you know? We're going to a lake and we're going to go skiing. Marco is obviously mad because he's like, they've already got my mom as a controller and now they want my dad. And so Jake gets on the phone and Marco just starts going off and Jake is just like, shut up. We don't talk about this stuff on the phone. They were more concerned about the Yeerks aliens listening in than they were about the government. Go figure. Marco calms down and uses the keywords that they indicate that a meeting needs to happen at headquarters. After the call, Marco spends a bunch of time imagining all the violent things that he would do to the Yeerks and to Visser 3. And he notes how like rage is addicting, but it makes you a husk of yourself, but he still imagined it until he felt numb. They all meet up in the woods and recap the events. Axe says he doesn't know anything that sounds like the thing that they described, but even Andalites don't know everything. Rachel says that it sounds more like a robot, and Axe said that hologram tech, like a 3D TV, is possible but takes a lot of power, not nuclear. They know Eric is in the sharing, so they know he's likely going to be at the lakes and skiing event, and so that's when and where they're going to go try to figure out what's going on with him. They figure that maybe the hologram is meant to trick human eyes and they could just morph into a different creature that can see differently and dehumanize it themselves to see Eric then. So they could use a morph that sees like a different wavelength to see through it. And Marco doesn't want to do an insect, but what else is there? You may have noted at this point that I'm not a doctor. I am not an animal doctor. I don't know anything about eyes or how they've evolved or how they work or any of that kind of stuff. But I do know that like there are different eyes that have evolved for different like creatures independently. So there's definitely some that probably see different wavelengths, like mantis shrimp that can see like UV or something, or maybe like an octopus would see differently. I don't know if there's a lot of land animals that see differently from man animals. Marco says as long as it's not an insect. After a couple days, they let him know that they're going to draw straws and see who morphs. And Axe is in because he's the alien expert. It made me laugh because it made me think of the Fast and the Furious franchise. Here we got the funny man, the pretty one, the animal expert. And whoever draws the most artistic straw will morph with Axe. So they're going to morph into a spider, which, if I remember correctly, isn't an insect, but like, isn't it though? Marco is all, I said no insects. And Cassie's like, this is a wolf spider. It has 2 more legs and 1 less body segment, so it's not an insect. And I said tarantula earlier about the cover, so I wouldn't trust my opinion on knowing the difference between all the intricacies of insects and arachnids and animals. Marco is really strongly against morphing into it and wants someone else to do it because he drew the short straw. But they want to be fair, and Jake reminds him that they're infiltrating the sharing and need to be animals that are native to the lake area. They can't be lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. Literally, I stopped reading to write this, to make that joke, and the next line was Cassie whispering, oh my. And I laughed. Ha ha ha. Marco drew first. He got the short straw. He talked about how he was scared but wouldn't be a wuss. And Cassie said she morphed the spider already, and Rachel said she would do it if Marco chickens out. And Marco's like, no, I've got to be brave because the girls are watching, and if it was just the guys, I could be a coward, but not so with the girls watching. The lake is a ways away, so they morphed into birds and flew there. Together, but separated by a distance that draws less suspicion as they got closer to the lake. But Marco said they were like a mile away from each other. But they were using thought speak to chat with each other. And I had not been under the idea that they could hear each other at that distance. There was in the second book, they were having issues thought speaking to Rachel when she was in the house basement. There's no way that was like a mile away. Does structure block out thought speech the way that it blocks Wi-Fi and stuff? Jake, Marco, and Axe are getting closer. Jake and Marco are bantering, and Axe is like, I don't understand. Marco is telling him that they're scared, but they're just trying to give themselves a distraction. And Axe says he's concerned because he doesn't like morphing into smaller creatures. He talks about what happens when they morph, what happens to the mass when they pick a smaller creature. The difference of your current mass and your new mass is stored in zero space, the same one that the ships use to fast travel. While it's unlikely, there could be a collision with a traveling ship and the stored mass. Like, how big is zero space? Is it bigger or smaller than other space? And what are the chances that a ship is really traveling through the allocated space memory of the morphing person in the morphing window? It's probably never going to really happen. So Jake separated so that he could find a place to do his part. He's going to morph into a fly to spy. Marco and Axe found a place a few hundred feet from the lake and morphed into wolf spiders. Marco was not excited because it's a bug, but did say that it was more like a predator than the other insects like flies or ants. Marco started to hunt a beetle, and while he wasn't letting the animal's instincts take over, he didn't try to stop them. Finally, Axe is just like, what are you doing? And Marco's like, what? I was not about to eat this beetle. Axe is like, we have the same morph. I know what you're doing. They made their way to the lake. Jake is already there as a fly. And they were like, how will we find this guy? We can't see at a good distance and stuff like that. Easily, really quickly, they find him. They describe his feet as a hologram that they can see through. And it's metal and plasticky and definitely not human. And Axe is like, I think Eric might be an android. Jake says he thinks he can see Eric because there's like a person. There's like a person that's all shimmery. He's like, and I see more than one of them here. Then all of a sudden, Marco is snatched up and he's being eaten by a crow. And in thought speak, just starts shouting globally. He's dying as a spider, but finds a way to unmorph. Manages to survive by bursting out of the crow and falling to the forest floor. And he looks up and there's Eric. Next chapter, Eric points out Marco's new haircut. Everyone's been doing it in this book, making Marco self-conscious. Marco is like, I know that's not a real person. He's just projecting a person. Does he project touch too with his like hologram? Because like if you were reaching out with a finger, touch. But like you see my finger, I need to project all the way and have like a physical sensation there. Otherwise it would like pretty instantly like fall apart when everything starts clipping through my hands, right? So a girl runs up behind Eric, is like, who is this on the earth floor? The ground. The Andalite bandits the Visser's been looking for. Marco. So he introduces the girl as Jenny, and Eric shouts that Jenny hurt her ankle and he's going to help her while the other controllers are still looking nearby. Because obviously they're all like, what was that? We know it's a morph person. Marco is very confused, and Eric tells him to morph into something small and escape and meet at Eric's house later with the group, and they'll explain everything. Eric quotes a line of Hamlet, and Marco's like, Hamlet? Shakespeare? And Eric's like, I saw the first performance, and that would make him very old. So Marco thinks that maybe Eric is trying to get everyone into the same place so that they could turn them into Visser as a group, but Eric is like, I know you're tough, but like, I could just turn you in and Visser would get everything out of you. So like, just show up. It's not a trap. Promise. You're going to meet some allies in your fight. So Marco's next scene, Marco's eating dinner with his dad and talks about they just have to go to Eric's because what choice do they have? And he describes the meal his dad cooks. Barbecue chicken, mashed potatoes, roasted corn on the cob. He just says, I have to eat this because this is the best my dad can do. And it's like, what? That is such a good meal. Like, do you know how much I wish I had the energy to cook that kind of a meal? He's so spoiled. And so the next sentence, he makes me eat my words, pun intended. Marco had no appetite because he was a spider eaten by a bird not long ago. Marco tries to prod his dad about like, what are you working on? In just like a non-suspicious way. And his dad is like, oh, well, I'm almost done on the observatory project. And soon I'm going to be working for a company called Matcom. But he says it in like a secretive way. And Marco's like, Like what weapons? His dad is like, I never worked with weapons because of your mom. He talks about how the last year and a half or so that they were together, that things had been different before her death. And so that gives Marco like a rough idea of how long she'd been a controller for. He said that he woke up and she was just sitting upright in bed one night and struggled and sounded like she was talking through a well, and said, they won't take you if you stay away from the military. And Marco knew that it must have been really hard for his mom to break free of the Yeerk control for long enough to say that. It had freaked his dad out enough that he had heeded that warning. Until now, he knows that Matcom has like some secretive projects and maybe related to the military or weapons. That's probably not what he's going to be working on. But that explains why Tom wants Marco to invite him to the sharing, why the Yeerks are now interested in his dad. Axe, Marco, Jake, and Cassie are going to go into Eric's house, and Rachel and Tobias are going to stay outside as backup if they need to bust in as a bear and a hawk. Again, they mention Axe is a blend of all of them except for Tobias because he was already a hawk. But if he tried to get Tobias's DNA, would he get a hawk? Or would he get nothing? Or would he get Tobias? Because he doesn't know what Tobias looks like, so he couldn't morph him even if he did get the DNA. Does this mean that Andalites have no idea what aphantasia is? Or do like those Andalites just not get the ability to morph? They knock on the door. Eric's dad opens up the door. Marco is like, it all looks normal to me. Average house, average things, 2 dogs. Cassie pets a dog, and the dad is like, so you like dogs? And she's like, I like all animals. But then he's like, again, so do you like dogs? This triggered a memory for me. I'm pretty sure it's coming about that the androids brought aliens here. Dogs are the descendants of them or something like that. So they go to the basement. Axe unmorphs on the way down. And the whole basement is like an elevator that just descends. Just a few floors. And after it's done descending, one of the walls disappears, revealing a hallway. And after like 50 feet, another wall disappears. Behind this second wall, there's a huge area bigger than the size of a football field, because that's what everything is in relation to. And there's a sun-like orb emitting yellow light in a park with grass and trees and squirrels and bees. And there's some androids and thousands of dogs of different shapes and varieties and breeds. The androids are described as having a muzzle-like mouth and short, stubby hands. An android comes up to them and starts shimmering and then looks like Eric. And Eric says that they are called the Chi. Eric says that he's showed them all of this to make sure that they know that the Chi are allies and know most of what the Yeerks know. They knew there was morphers on Earth, and some of the Chi want the Animorphs' help. He projects history for them, showing a planet with 2 suns, and he shows them creatures that look similar to the androids, all sorts of strange foliage and such is described. Eric says that the aliens are called Pemalites. Pemalites? Pemalites. Pemalites. They were doing FTL, faster than light travel, 100,000 years before the Andalites even built fire. Axe was all like, as if. But so Axe was all perturbed about this, but like, someone comes first, and it's pretty arrogant of the Andalites to think that they were the first ones, right? He says that the Pemalites created the Chi to be their companions, and the entire race had evolved away anything evil and were super peaceful. They didn't want to conquer or anything. They just wanted peace for all. Oh, they're like Mr. Burns. Friends. Then the Howlers came and attacked. No demands, just destruction. A few hundred Chi and Pemalites escaped into Z-space with no plan but escape. Marco asks why didn't they fight back? Eric says that they'd forgotten all combat and war. That triggered a memory in me that the Chi wanted the Animorphs' help because they couldn't fight, and so they could use the Animorphs to actually fight, and the others, and they'll still be pacifistic. And so he says that while they did escape, the Pemalites were still dying from germ weapons. They remembered Earth and headed there. They hadn't been there in like 50,000 years, and things had changed. The Chi couldn't save the Pemalites. Somehow, they've implanted the Pemalites' essence into wolves and dogs. Almost all of the dogs possess this essence, this joy of life, because of this. Not all of them. All the dogs are a reminder of the Pemalites and their creators and a piece of them. And I know that they say most dogs and not all dogs, but like, there's some aggressive dogs I'm sure those ones aren't the ones that Pemalites are in, right? Like, because they can't have aggression. Eric says the Chi hologram a full human life over and over to live as humans. And Marco asks, how long have they been doing this? And Eric says he helped build the pyramids as a slave, but it was hard to hide his strength because he was still new to being human back then. Do dogs evolve that fast? Or was he just like chilling for a while when they came up with the idea to pretend to be humans? He says they are like never interfere with human affairs. You just choose to watch violent and pretend you're not involved, but like you could do something about it. Even if they couldn't stop it, they could like reveal themselves and like humans would be like, oh my gosh, alien stuff? He does say that their home world had 4 times the gravity of Earth. They were built that way, so that's why they're a little stronger than humans and stuff. Jake was like, why stay a slave when you could just overthrow Egypt? Eric is like, psh, typical human. The Chi are hardwired to be non-violent, and we can't hurt another living being, even in self-defense. What if they did something that accidentally harmed something? Like, what do they count as living? Because clearly they were fine interfering with dogs and like blending Pemalites and dogs. Anyways, a group of Chi approaches and they're upset that Eric did all of this and told them everything. And they said they can't be involved. But Eric is like, we stood by and let the howlers kill the Pemalites. And if the humans fall, then so will the dogs. And if the dogs fall, all of the Pemalite legacy is gone. And what was the point? One of the other Chi holograms into a little old lady of 80 named Chi, I don't know, codename Maria. She says she is not upset with the humans, but with Eric and his cohort. She says they cannot fight, etc., etc. Eric is like, I've already infiltrated the Yeerks and a bit with the sharing. And the Yeerks own a tech company called Matcom. Bum, bum, bum. They obtained a crystal from the Yang trader. This crystal is over 50,000 years old and more powerful than anything the Andalites or humans or Yeerks could hope to have. They don't even know that it's a Pemalite crystal. And they're going to design something to take over all the computers on Earth with it. Really? That's all they need? The Yeerks don't have the technology to overtake all of the humans like computers on Earth without this crystal? Seriously? But if the Chi get the crystal, they can rewire their code so that they can be violent and fight back. This does lead me to a couple questions. There's other aliens that the Yeerks trade with. They don't just take them over. Or do they? Or did they like take over the Yang trader? And that's how, why trade when you could just conquer? It's left unexplained. So I don't know. Maybe they did trade. Maybe they conquered. I don't know. Maybe we'll find out someday. Also, they could probably take over the whole world's computers without this crystal, right? I mean, we didn't have the best like security back then and still don't in a lot of places, but like you would think that they would be more advanced than our simple computers. They ask, how do you know all this? He opens his head. Inside of that head, he shows a Yeerk trapped within. He said that he made a little place for it to reside, taps it for info, and it doesn't get to learn anything. Every 3 days, when they go to the Kandrona pool, he just holograms a Yeerk popping in and popping out. I guess the Yeerks don't really communicate in their natural state. How do they coordinate anything then? Like somebody had to be like, hey, if we take over people, we can do things, but if they don't really communicate, how do they coordinate of like, all right, make sure to like come over to the pool because I'm going to get you a host here, like over and over and over and over and over. So Marco is having some feelings about the Yeerks, about how terrible the Yeerks are, but this is also like a hostage Yeerk situation. But mostly he's excited to have new allies. Here we have our plot. Eric says he needs the Animorphs to get the crystal, but the Yeerks have it in like a labyrinth in the Matcom building, guarded by the most elite Hork-Bajir warriors in a room with pressure-sensitive walls and floors and ceiling, pure darkness with sensors for any kind of light like infrared and UV, etc. And Maria protests and says that they stood by while countless millions were killed and such before, and they just can't harm anything still. Marco is like, that's the problem. You stood by and let it all happen, and we're fighting for our lives here, and we just can't allow it to happen to us. I guess it's just because the other civilizations didn't know that the Chi were there. Otherwise, they could have made the same pleas of like, please help us. And I have a vague recollection here that they get the crystal and Eric helps them like effortlessly, decimates the Yeerk forces. The Animorphs are like, wow, so cold and powerful. But I could be wrong, right? Like I could just be remembering it as like frightening and overwhelming and stuff. Jake says, we're going to do whatever it takes because the Yeerks have my brother. And Marco, I guess at this point still, none of the others know that his mom is Visser 1, so he could also make the plea of like, and my mother. They're taking the elevator back up, and Eric asks if they have a deal. Get the crystal, the Chi will help the Animorphs. Jake says yes, unless anybody objects. Cassie speaks up and says they would have to talk it over. Before that finishes, they hear a whole bunch of bear noises upstairs and some scuffling. Jake says they were gone a while. Their friends are probably coming to rescue them. But Eric says that shouldn't be a problem. Marco runs into the living room. He's like, oh, Rachel's the bear. Chill out. And he just sees Marco's dad bot holding the bear in a full Nelson. And Rachel calms down, unmorphs, and just demands answers. Cassie's like, we'll fill you in later. Marco asks why the dad would be able to restrain Rachel if they were not violent. Eric says that he knew it wasn't a real bear, but if Rachel was stronger and tried to harm him, he would have had to just lay down his life and let it happen and allow himself to be destroyed rather than harm her. But wouldn't that reveal that there's androids? None of them have accidentally been harmed before or put into the situation where they would have to like get murdered. On the way out, Marco thanked Eric for being at his mom's funeral. And Eric was like, hey, you should know something. And Marco's like, yeah, she's Visser 1. Eric is surprised that they've learned so much. Everyone's back at headquarters, recounting the events to Rachel and Tobias, talking it over. Cassie is like, we're making a peaceful civilization violent, and I don't like that. And the others are like, yeah, but like the Pamelites didn't fight and they got annihilated because of it. Axe is like, yes, it's a dilemma. And then Marco is like, by the way, my dad was talking about Matcom and working there, and Tom was asking about my dad. So like, I kind of think I have to do this because it seems like there's something going on. They agree reluctantly, like we have to do it. Cassie goes to another room, comes back with a cage, and inside is a bat. This is going to be how they infiltrate the secret room. But I thought they couldn't make noise. Trust me, bats make noises. I know, I've had bats on me. Even just flying would disrupt the air pressure, right? And they're a mammal, so they have heat. They emit infrared. I don't understand. I thought that this room was like, it sensed for all this pressure and light and all that stuff. And light is just on the electromagnetic spectrum with infrared. No. They were planning to go on the mission the next weekend, but Eric called Marco and said that they should maybe do it tonight. They all gathered at headquarters in the middle of the night when their parents are sleeping. Eric meets them there. The Yeerks are installing a new security system, and he doesn't have many details, but between that and the race to get the crystal to infect computers, the time crunch, it's all just too immense. They should do this before the new security, before anything happens. They don't like going in without a plan. They probably can't defeat more defenses, and so they have to go. Tobias is going to sit this one out. Eric is going to wait outside the building. I have no idea how they're going to plan to get the crystal out, even if they do get it. Won't the crystal be under like a pressure switch? Even the old ruins on Earth have a pressure switch tech. I mean, just look at this documentary clip I pulled. So they fly to the roof of the building as owls. Marco and Axe morph into wolf spiders and rappel down a small exhaust pipe that's like 3 inches big. And the others morph into cockroaches. At the moment, I'm not sure why they're using the silk as a rope, because wouldn't bugs just be able to crawl down the side of the piping? Unless it's like really smooth aluminum or something, right? But like they run out of silk and they don't know how far down they are. But Axe is like, well, we're pretty small creatures. Let's just jump. And the cockroaches are definitely gonna survive. So they cut the silk cord and do a trust fall. Everyone falls to the floor. They're inside of a heating system. Everyone survives, obviously. Maybe the heating system, like I said, smooth aluminum. They wouldn't be able to crawl around on it. I don't know. So they're walking in the direction that they need. They know they need to go down and take a turn. They're seeing different offices through the vent grates. as they're going, then they get chased by a rat. They are slower, but they're able to get away and into a small chamber that the rat isn't going to follow them through. And that's because this chamber is a pilot light above them and gas vents below them. Luckily, they make it across just before the heating turns on and like incinerates everything in that area. And it's interesting that this whole scene, I can totally visualize an action movie, except instead of people, I see spiders and cockroaches and a rat. Oh my gosh, this might be the only acceptable use of AI. Make that Judge Dredd scene with Rob Schneider and Sylvester Stallone, but with rats and spiders and cockroaches in a smaller vent. The rest of the vent travel went fine, calm. They find the entrance to the high security room. Turns out they can stay on the perimeter of that room 2 feet. Like there's a 2 feet perimeter that doesn't have trigger sensor plates for some reason. So their plan at this point is to just jump out of the vent onto the floor within that 2 foot gap. They know they're going to survive. They've done it already. And Marco makes a joke and says he just wants to jump from a plane without a parachute. And I know that's foreshadowing because I know there is scenes in other books where they fall through the sky. I want to say it's ants, but maybe it's cockroaches. And I have another scene where there's an airplane and Jake is a fly, and it's very memorable in that I remember it being upsetting. But that's a different book another time. So they spend some time chatting while they're morphing and unmorphing. I can't believe that the Yeerks put this room in total darkness, and have pressure plates and everything, but don't have any kind of noise sensors. Seems like a pretty big oversight to me. They morph into bats for the first time since they didn't get a chance to practice. And they see, with echolocation, all sorts of wires that they can't touch or it's going to trip alarms. They are able to get to the middle of the room. On there is a podium that's holding a crystal on it. There's some wires connected, and the crystal's just sitting there. And then they realize, how are we going to carry this out of the room? It's only the size of like a grape, but they don't have any arms. But then they think like, well, maybe I can carry this in our mouth, but then you can't echolocate. Does that mean that bats can only hear the echolocation that they emit? Like, is my bat, like if I had 2 bats next and one in each hand, and I was like, squeak, 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 bat echolocation noise, bat echolocation noise. This one only hears or sees the echolocation that it does, and this one only sees the echolocation that this one does. So they think the best plan now is just to brute force and fight their way out. They just trust that Eric's intel of there being guards, but they don't have a better plan. Like, they know there's elite guards there, but like, what's the alternative? They could have other plans. What about one more person unmorphs and tries to secure the crystal to the back of the bat somehow? Nah, fighting is the best way. What if one person unmorphs, swallows the crystal, and then morphs back into a bat, and then later throws up the crystal? No, morph and fight our way out. It's the first and only plan, action movie style. Marco's like, this is just reckless. Even I've got a bad feeling. I have more of a flashback memory of like all of the Animorphs being in trouble, but getting the crystal to Eric just in time and him saving them. So let's see. They morph into their classical battle morphs: tiger, gorilla, wolf, grizzly bear, and a light. They barrel their way through the building, all the alarms going off and everything, obviously, as they've tripped all the alarms at this point. They make it through the lobby. Through to the lobby. They can see outside. Escape is so close. But there's 20 humans with rifles and 24 Hork-Bajir behind them. A woman steps out and is like, just give up. And the visitor's going to reward me. Even if you're dead, I'll get rewarded. And Marco shows the crystal in his little gorilla paws. The woman tells the humans with the rifles, stand down. Don't want to accidentally hit the crystal. Sends the Hork-Bajir forward. Marco sees Eric outside the lobby, but he can't do anything to help. The Hork-Bajir started attacking. Marco takes one out, gets hit by another. Immediately, he's like, his gorilla guts are on the outside instead of the inside. Not where you want them to be. They're all getting overtaken by the Hork-Bajir. Marco manages to make it to the edge of the lobby, towards the window, punches through, opens his hand, and Eric gets the crystal, and then, like, fades to black. But Marco wakes up with like somebody yelling, Marco, unmorph, unmorph. Few things. They know that Marco as the gorilla has the crystal. They could still totally shoot all the other animals, right? That's it. That's actually the only thing is like kill all the rest. And then all you got to do is deal with the gorilla. I am not a Yeerk. Maybe they're not the best at strategy. Okay. So Marco wakes up he finds out he's human again. He gets up. Everyone is there in one piece on the ground outside. And someone else is there sobbing that he doesn't see immediately. They say that Eric did have to give Marco a shock to get his heart started again. Axe says that Eric even reattached his arm and shows a scar around it. But, like, all Axe has to do is morph, and that'll go away, right? Why does he need his arm fixed? Is he going to have a scar in the future books? That doesn't make sense, because once he remorphs and morphs again, boom, all fixed, right? Rachel says that Eric saved them all, took out all the humans, all the Harkbajir. Brutal massacre, didn't even last 10 seconds. They said that Eric hasn't said anything since he got here. He's just been crying. And Marco is like, how does an android cry? But he approaches him and Eric asks, how does he go on living with all of these memories? He can't just forget like humans can. And he gives the crystal back and says, he can't help them. I already changed my programming back. I'll never do that again. And maybe the Chi can give them info from time to time, but they definitely can't fight this war. So I guess Eric is making the decision for the rest of the people, but like maybe he would have a way of sharing with the Chi, like what happens of like, this is how brutal it is. You don't understand. Like, I never want to do that again. Marco and Jake are at the beach a week later playing with Jake's dog. And Marco says Eric gave him a phone number to call if they needed anything. And they could see if the Chi will reply with intel if they could. The Chi will probably just fight the Yeerks in the way that they can still. Jake's dog finds a couple of other dogs running around on the beach. And they all seem to be having fun. Marco is like holding out the crystal and he's like, what are we going to do with this? It's so powerful. And the dogs notice that, seem to have a really big interest in it. Jake's dog grabs it and runs off and swims out a little ways, and comes back without the crystal. So I guess they're just going to forget that it's around, and that's the plan. Maybe when it resurfaces, somebody will have a more peaceful use for it. The end. So I kind of felt like the ending was unsatisfying. I mean, there's a ton of questions not resolved. There's the times in the future, like when are the androids going to appear? Are they going to appear? I think that they could have saved the crystal somewhere and just like found a way to use it, but I guess the dogs hiding it for them means that even if they were tortured, they wouldn't be able to like give up the location of it or anything to the Yeerks or anything, so they can't get it again. I think they did talk about the moral implications of making a peaceful people like violent. I think there's still a lot to be explored there, especially for the Chi to be insiders within the sharing and stuff. Like, definitely still want to know about Axe's arm and scar and like, how does that work? Because he should be able to morph and boom, fully healed again. Does that mean that like if you got the ability to morph after getting a scar, you would still have that scar after you morph? Because like that's still not your DNA changing, right? What about organs? If you had your appendix removed and then you morph and remorph and unmorph, do you have your appendix back? Because like, again, that's damage to your physical body, not like a part of your DNA changing. Maybe it's just sitting out in Z space every day. Like, no, that doesn't make sense. I don't get it. All right. I think that's all of my thoughts. I think it was a decent book. I think they had a pretty easy time getting the crystal in the end, but I had a really difficult time finishing this book. It took me so much longer than usual. I also feel like this book might be really filler because I don't remember the Chi being mentioned much outside of this book, but also, even if they were mentioned, is there always going to be a reason that they're on the sidelines? You know what I mean? Like, oh, the Chi can't help with that because magnets are involved and magnets mess us up or something. And I also realized, is this the first book without an appearance by the Visser? He didn't actually appear in this book. He's just talked about. Like, there's not that many Yeerks or controllers in the story, like, other than the guards, just the nameless guards. At least that's what it seems like. Like, the Yeerks mostly appeared at the end as the guards and a little bit with the sharing and stuff. So this kind of feels like a side quest where you miss it and not much maybe changes. What implications of the world are there now that we know there's androids around? They didn't even say if Marco's dad was working at Matcom anymore. What are some other things that you think I missed or should have mentioned or that you enjoyed about this book? No spoilers for the future, though. Feel free to leave a comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Engage me. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.